Hey there, Jess.
Hey Matt, good morning.
Good morning. How are you
Afternoon.
today?
Doing well, thanks. How about you?
I'm doing well. It is middle of May, a little bit past the middle of May, and I know I like to talk about the weather when I'm introducing myself to things. And I'm reaching the 90s down here in North Texas, and I'm all for it. Bring on the heat. I'm all about it. How about you? Where are you at today?
I'm in Northern Virginia and we are in the 80s, but I'm headed to Scottsdale this weekend, so I'll be in the 100 range.
Yeah, I
So,
was gonna say Arizona's already pushing max temperature these days,
yes.
so nice. Okay, okay, good to hear. Good to hear. Well, it's great to have you. But hey, you and I and where we're located is not the most important part of today's episode. It is our guest who's going to be. You know what? Let's just bring him up on stage. Sir, you there?
Yes, I am.
Dan Lorenc, right? Did I say that
Lawrence.
right?
Close enough. Yeah.
How do you really say it?
Lawrence.
Lawrence.
Yeah.
Dan, I'm going to be honest with you. I was nowhere near close.
Yeah, it's fine. No one is. Yeah.
Hang on, but have you heard that version before?
That's the standard one.
Okay, all right,
Yeah.
Lawrence. Okay, everyone, in case you're just listening to this, go look up Dan's name and tell me how you would have pronounced it the first time you got there. Awesome, well, Dan. Thanks for being here. It's great to have you here, CEO and co-founder of Chainguard. Correct.
Yes.
All
You
right,
got that one right.
we've got it. I'm good with like combined easy 5-letter, 6-letter
All right.
words. But hey, it's great to have you here. First off, thanks for joining us. Please tell us a little bit about yourself. Kind of who you are, where you're at, and maybe some about what Chain Guard is and what they do. Because I have some hints in the name, but I want to hear straight from you.
Sure. Yeah, so I'm Dan Lawrence. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Chainguard. The company is about 2.5 years old now. Before starting the company, I was an engineer at Google for about 10 years, working on a bunch of open source stuff, security stuff, developer tooling, everything kind of in that space. The company, we're focused on software supply chain security. And so that means basically we help you use all of that software that is in your supply chain more securely. So typical, stats, a typical company that uses software or writes software uses a ton of open source code. By lines of code, usually open source is like 90 to 98% of the code in your code base. And so that means you can spend a lot of time working on the code you write, trying to make it as secure as possible. But that's really only like 2 to 10% of the overall code in your stack. Open source is great. It's really secure overall. It's not like it's bad in any way, but
Mm-hmm.
all software has bugs, and when you didn't write 90 to 98% of it, there's going to be a significant number of bugs up there too, and some of those bugs can cause security issues. So that's what we help companies deal with.
Yeah, absolutely. I like that. I'm curious. This is a big issue lately.
Yeah.
I feel like software supply chain is a big hot topic. So, Jessica and I actually were at RSA a
Oh, cool.
whopping 2 weeks ago now. I'm trying to it's not
I
that
was
long
there.
ago.
Yeah, it feels like a month ago at this
Doesn't it?
point, but
Yeah.
yeah.
And being at RSA feels like a week. And then it felt like it was itself months ago. It was 3 days. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? But nonetheless,
I sent an email to someone I met like 2 days after RSA saying, "Great connecting with you last week," and I was like, "Wait, that was 2 days ago."
all I did was fly home, you know?
Yeah.
Time
Um,
is not real in this context for sure.
no, no, it's not. Software supply chain is a big deal right now. I feel like there's been some recent kind of vulnerability disclosures, some bugs and stuff that have made it like a really big issue because
Yeah.
it has kind of had a far and wide impact, if you will. What made you like? I mean, 2 years is
Yeah.
right in the hot time of that. What
Yeah.
made you want to be like, hey, we need to solve this?
Yeah, so I've been working on it for a while at Google toward the end of my time there. Google, like many other companies, uses tons and tons of open source code, and Google cares a lot about security. And so Google was, pretty worried at that point about, the security risks of using open source code. One of the attacks you're probably talking about, the recent one, was the XZUtils backdoor. That was an attack where basically someone over years built up trust with the maintainers of a project. This was an anonymous person, like just someone on the internet with a fake name, and eventually got maintainership access to that project where they could merge whatever code they wanted, and then they used that power to slip in this really complicated backdoor that would have basically given the attacker access to any Linux machine running SSH at a high level. It got caught at the last minute by a mixture of pure luck and one person noticing that the CPU performance on his desktop while he was benchmarking something was a little bit higher than he thought it should be. But that exact threat model is the one that I had been worried about for a while before starting this company. Um, the overall space, like you said, started to get really hot about 2 years ago, and that was basically because of the SolarWinds breach. So SolarWinds, the company, got attacked toward the end of 2020 with something very similar, where somebody got access to their build system and used that to implant a backdoor in the code that popped out of that build system. That's not a new attack, right? We've known about this since like the 1980s. Ken Thompson, one of the early Unix guys at Bell Labs, wrote this paper in the early 1980s called "Reflections on Trusting Trust." Amazing paper. Everybody here should read it if they haven't seen it before. But to prank his coworkers, he basically put a backdoor into a compiler that would insert a backdoor into everything it compiled, including other compilers. So it was like this crazy self-propagating backdoor. And then he kind of handed it to his coworkers. Nobody could figure out what was going on. And sort of the end premise of it is, unless you trust every line of code ever, since the dawn of time, then you can't really have any trust in modern computing. And it was, such a good paper and so terrifying that everyone just blocked it out of their memories for the next 40 years or so. Until attackers started noticing this area. And of course, in cyber, we run around basically playing whack-a-mole, trying to hit the threats that attackers are actually paying attention to. So because attackers have noticed, and because we've gotten so good at securing all of the other areas of software, this becomes the next easiest way in. So that's why the whole industry is playing a little bit of catch up here.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Oh,
go ahead. No, go
Matt.
ahead, Jess.
No, I was going to say that's, obviously it's very relevant at the moment, and you were clearly working on these things at Google. I'd love to hear a little bit about what kind of, what was the decision point where you said, okay, I'm going to leave my cushy job and go into this insane world of starting a company and solve this problem in a different way.
Yeah, it's a funny story. So my co-founder, our CTO Matt, I worked with him for years on this stuff at Google. He took some time off during the pandemic, and he bought one of those giant big green egg barbecue grills, and he was just perfecting his brisket for a while. And I kept trying to get him to come back to Google, and he kept saying nah, and he'd send me more pictures of brisket. And then finally one day he said, "All right, I'm ready to work again, but how about instead of me coming back, we quit and do a startup?" And I was like, "Oh, that does sound like a good idea." So went out, bought a new laptop the next day, put in notice, figured out how to start a company, and that's how we got here.
Perfect. Do you have a green egg now?
I don't know, but I eat his whenever I can.
Oh, I love brisket. So yeah, that's a whole other rabbit hole we could go down. Very cool story. Love that, and it's quite a journey, right? So it's an interesting, fun, rewarding, and stressful journey all at the same time.
Yes.
And so tell us a little bit more about kind of Chainguard. What is the unique problem that you solve, or what's your real differentiator in the market today?
Yeah, there's tons and tons of security tools in the market already, and they're really good at finding vulnerabilities, finding bugs, finding issues in both your code and in open source code. What we do a little bit differently, though, is we fix all of those. And so instead of we're not a supply chain security tool or anything like that, we're trying to sell a secure supply chain that people can then use and download from us and consume and build their applications and build their infrastructure on top of. So our product is right now it's a set of container images, so Docker images basically. But inside of those, we build every piece of software in that completely from source ourselves in a super hardened build system. All the dependencies and the transitive dependencies, even the tools used to build everything. So the compilers, we bootstrap the first compiler that then we use to build all the next compilers all the way out. So we have this massive set of open source packages that we're constantly rebuilding, patching, securing, hardening, bumping, keeping up to date. And then we turn those into consumable software for our customers in the form of container images.
Wow, that is really cool. So this feels like it's something that anyone using open source technology and software would be interested in. But as a startup founder, you've got to really focus on who your target customer is. So I'd love to hear kind of who you're focused on today and what the go-to-market looks like.
Yeah, sure. The main benefit a lot of our customers get out of using our product is that we patch all of the vulnerabilities present. And so anybody that's run a container scanner or something like that is probably used to seeing thousands of vulnerabilities sitting around in there. Many of them aren't real, many of them aren't actually exploitable, but it's still a ton of noise to actually have to go and sift through. And so our big value proposition is that we just patch or deal with them all in some fashion. And so we kind of have a zero CVE SLA, we call it, where we keep them at zero all the time. If something pops up, our team goes and jumps on it and fixes it through automation or manual work or whatever it takes. So real target customers right now are people that run containers, have a container scanner, and care about the results. Is the easiest way to put it. There's a bunch of different market segments, a bunch of different verticals, a bunch of different industries where this is really important. But think things like financial services, people selling software to governments, people in highly security critical environments that are all on kind of a cloud native stack.
This is I'm really appreciating, Dan, what you're calling out here as kind of a need from an industry perspective, because one of the observations that I'm seeing so much as we go through kind of this like new era, new modern phase, if you will, is that it's just build, deploy. And it's not going to be any secret because it's been this way for decades. But I feel like the whole, hey, I need to write I need a network stack really quick in a particular application I'm writing. It's really easy to just bring in whatever's written out there. And I think to the point that, was being made earlier is we're not going to review every single atom of every single piece of code that we bring in. You know what I mean? And I appreciate that you guys are here to kind of help out with that process. Have you seen though, over the past few years, especially with, kind of like SolarWinds build process compromise? And I love that you picked up on the XZ backdoor as well, because I spent a whole episode dissecting that. Have you seen like the industry change a little bit? Have you seen some best practices or anything like get better, if you will?
Things are going in the right direction, I would say. The great part of open source is that anybody on the internet can write and review and consume it, and that gives you huge economies of scale and benefits. But the terrifying part to some extent is that not everyone on the internet is a nice person. Anyone that spent more than 10 minutes in the comments section on YouTube could probably pick that out. And so I think a bunch of different contexts, right? Companies are paying way more attention to that. Their inventory management, I would say, like if developers can grab whatever they want. At least leaving breadcrumbs around to make sure you know what they grabbed in case something bad happens later. You can find it, remediate it. That's taken huge steps forward basically since Log4Shell a couple of years ago.
Oh yeah,
another big one in this space. There have been a bunch where Log4Shell, just for context, was a vulnerability in Log4j, basically the most commonly used logging library in Java, which is the most commonly deployed software platform out there. And the vulnerability was like basically a worst case scenario where it was trivial to exploit and could lead to like full system compromise. So a real perfect storm, or worst case scenario across the board. And the problem, the community did a great job. The vulnerability had been there for years. It was patched over a weekend. New secured versions were rolled out, but companies found they had no idea where they were running it, and that was the big problem. So we've seen huge improvements there. There's been a big push for SBOMs, or software bill of materials, from the government, and a lot of adoption there, which helps people understand, at least recognize what they're using so they can fix it if something bad happens. And then in open source too, we're seeing a lot of people pay more attention to contributors, seeing a lot more like drive-by attempts at things that kind of look like XZ, and there's a lot more scrutiny happening there. But yeah, across the board, I think people are paying attention to this, and we're moving in the right direction.
That's good. That's good to hear. I first off, like everyone who's listening here, like, I mean, Dan's definitely got his pulse on kind of this part of the industry here. And I'm glad to hear that. A lot of times we speak with founders who are like, yeah, there's no one doing this and it's just getting worse, and it's glad to hear that, like, and I'm obviously assuming too that Chainguard's contributing to the success and the betterment of best practices. But I feel like in addition to that, a lot of guidance coming down from CISA in the United States, some of the regulations in the EU and things, they're really driving forward and helping companies like yours just kind of be like, yeah, like now it's you know what I mean? Like we don't have to define the space as much as we had to before because it's being called out by good authoritative figures.
Yeah, it never helps, or it never hurts anyway, to have the government telling people they have to do things better. CIS has been huge in this with the SBOM stuff. They also just launched a Secure by Design initiative a couple of years ago. They just put out a pledge that we signed and a bunch of other companies signed to adopt those Secure by Design principles. NIST has a whole framework they rolled out last year called the Secure Software Development Framework, which It's great, but it's, like other NIST documents, it's like 800 pages long, full of like, thousands of cross
That
references
seems
to other
short.
things. So it's a little hard to digest, but it's all good stuff in there.
Hmm.
And I think the real kind of change is paying attention not just to the security of the software itself and how it's run, but the security of how it's developed,
Yeah.
which is really what supply chain security is all about.
I'm curious, is supply chain security in your thoughts, and obviously like
Yeah.
this is probably what Chainguard does, but is supply chain security something that is to be outsourced, or is it a thing that organizations need to get better at with the eventual self-management of it?
Yeah, it's both, right?
Hmm.
And you can outsource it to the extent that you outsource software in general, right? If you're not writing the software yourself, then you need to make sure that whoever is following those practices. You
Hmm.
can't bolt it on after the fact. If it wasn't developed securely to start out with, you can't go fix that yourself later, late in the process. And so that's sort of where we come in. All that software, that third-party software, that open source software, we do that securely for you. But we can't then go fix your software yourself either. No one really can.
Right.
And that's probably why it's a bit challenging too, of a problem to solve. Like, a lot of the conversations at RSA about this, right? RSA has CISOs and security teams and AppSec and ProdSec teams. But they're not the ones writing the software in most of these cases. And it's really a change in the way that developers and development teams have to operate
Hmm.
to really solve this problem. And so I think to really fix it, you have to bring those two groups together, which is always been a challenge in this industry.
Yeah. I like that. I like that. Now, I want to go a little bit further into like what Chainguard does, only because I did a little bit of research ahead of
Yeah.
time to get into it. Obviously, not on your last name pronunciation, but Chainguard I did. But I'm curious, how does containerization kind of change all of this? Because I know, and
Yeah.
I'm going to speak very generally here. When some folks think of like securing software, some folks think of, oh, okay, you're going to like watch my Git commits and my libraries and my imports to see
Yeah.
what's there. And I know other folks are like, you're going to be monitoring my Kubernetes clusters
Yeah.
to help me see what's going on. And kind of, I don't know, I want to get your thoughts on like, how does containerization kind of change the idea of software supply chains?
It makes it easier and harder, I would
Hmm.
say. It makes it easier because we finally have like this standard unit of software that gets deployed that most of the industry is using now. And so now that everyone's deploying things the same way, pretty much, and managing it the same way, it makes sense to focus on tooling at that layer because it's so broadly applicable. Um, where it makes it harder, though, is containers are massive blobs of combinations of various Linux distros and things that people installed with package managers and things that they curl pipe to bash from the internet. And so, as a unit, it's great that it's standardized, but as a unit, it also leaves a lot off the table in terms of actually solving this. In the old world, before containers, development teams were responsible just for their little application piece. And then they had like a systems or SRE team or infrastructure team that managed everything below that layer. Containers basically handed all of that control over to developers, which is why they blew up so quickly. You don't have to file a ticket anymore to have someone update a package on all of the nodes at once or install some new dependency your app needs. You can just do it yourself in the Docker file. And that's great for velocity. That gives developers all the power and control they need. But if you're at a huge company with hundreds or thousands of teams, each building their own containers, there's no more standardization or control left at that layer. Everybody's probably doing things differently. They're doing it their own way.
Hmm.
For that Log4j example, you probably in the old world you probably had one version of Java that you would upgrade every couple of years. In the new world, every team has their own version of Java, and you have no idea if they're updating them on the same cadence or anything like
Hmm.
that. So it's both a pro and a con, I would say.
Yeah, I got that. No, I could see that being, um, because obviously, whenever something new, and I'm not calling
Yeah.
containers new before anyone talks to me about like BSD jails and things like that.
Yeah.
I want to talk more about how once something becomes adopted and it becomes mainstream, if you go take a look at the floor of RSA or Black Hat, you can start to see like kind of the security shift. Like when people were first talking about containerization from an application development perspective, security was not right there. Like, oh yeah, we're going to
Yeah.
secure this thing,
Yeah.
right? It was behind,
Yeah.
obviously, because we always are.
Yeah.
But the flip side of that is when you can start to see the trends shift moving over. I feel like that definitely represents more of an enterprise adoption, where now
Yeah.
it's like, okay, this thing is large enough that adversaries, and let's be clear, adversaries drive a lot of this.
Yeah.
Adversaries see it as a footprint to attack. They find success with it, and that backs up into, okay, we should be securing this thing properly now, as opposed to just, hey, it makes our team faster. right?
Yeah, it's the wave of kind of how all new technology gets adopted. It starts
Hmm.
with, hobbyists, people playing around, people that can move fast. They grab something, it blows up. Enterprises tend to come a little bit slower. Those hobbyists care less about security. They just want to move fast, and then security has to play a little bit of a catch up. And
Yeah.
that combined with the fact that it let developers do whatever they wanted and took a lot of control out of the security team's hands that they used to have. They say shift left, like containers shifted almost everything left, and now security teams kind of got stuck over to the right, waiting for these things to be thrown over the wall. So I think security is playing that catch-up game, trying to run left too. I see a lot of organizations now embedding security teams inside of development teams. The whole DevSecOps thing. I think it's both good and the only way at this point that we're really going to solve these issues.
Absolutely. And so, Dan, cybersecurity, we see there's tons of new startups all the time. The competitive landscape here is strong. Would love to kind of hear a little bit about the competitive landscape in your
Yeah.
space. Is this where are you seeing a lot of competition? Are we kind of in the early phases, or kind of talk through that with us?
Yeah, I think if you just look at the software supply chain security landscape, it probably looks way more competitive than it is because there's tons of people that get lumped into that category. But it's also a huge, messy category that doesn't really exist in some ways because anything can really get classified as that. So you see tons of vendors that do completely different things, all kind of getting thrown into those Gartner quadrants and stuff together. But like the problem affects every single stage of the software development lifecycle. And so if you actually zoom in and see what each company is doing, there's way less competition than it looks like in the beginning.
Very interesting. Yeah, we could go on an entire episode about quadrants and
Yeah.
classification and all of those things, the battles we fight every day. Very cool. No, that's fantastic. So just kind of going back to Dan the person, who would you say is your biggest, or what do you think is your biggest inspiration in life?
All right, we'll do both. Who and what? Who? It's got to be my dad.
Mm.
So yeah, he was an immigrant to the United States. He was born in Poland. He came here when he was like 10 or 11 years old. Couldn't speak any English. Started his own company. He ran a roofing company my whole life, and kind of gave me and my family this opportunity. So he worked incredibly hard. He still does. He's my biggest inspiration and why I can get up and work this hard every day. What inspires me though, I just like solving really hard problems with a really awesome team. I think this problem in particular is incredibly challenging, and it's been around for 40 years, and we haven't really made a dent at it, and we have a chance to now. And it's an awesome opportunity, and I'm really lucky to be here with this company and this awesome group of folks working on trying to solve it.
Amazing. And I'm sure your father, being an entrepreneur, played a role in your decision making here to say, okay, I can do this. I've seen how this works. I come from a similar background, so I've watched my dad build a business, and it definitely is inspiring. So that's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. And then if you could kind of give your customers one piece of advice, what would that be?
Yeah, the biggest one in this space anyway is just pay attention to what you're using. That's like the easiest, the low hanging fruit. Nothing is ever going to be perfect, but the more understanding you have of all of the software and the way things are going, the easier you're going to be able to recover from it. We focus a lot in security on preventing attacks, and that's really important too. But the next biggest one behind that is, the MTTR, or mean time to resolution one. You're never going to prevent all attacks, but the faster you can detect them, the faster you can recover from them, the faster you can patch, the faster you can update. That's like it's like 1A and 1B I would rank in priority. Know what you're doing and then be able to recover from stuff quickly, and that'll get you out of most pickles.
I like that. Dan, you're bringing in an interesting part of all this, which is kind of like the planning, the ifing,
Yeah.
of what happens if this goes down. And
Yeah.
I think uh, like giving the angle on it that your company provides is kind of like a little bit of a different approach than probably a lot of organizations are used to. So I love that advice. Not because it sounds like the same thing we've been saying,
Yeah.
but it's like, I want you to do this thing, but I want you to do it with more insight that you can get from us because we've got visibility. We can help you solve problems that are not like typical incident response things.
Yeah.
I think a lot of folks think of, I need to have a plan for when I get hit by ransomware or I discover a high severity or critical severity alert or something. And I know some listeners may just couch this into patch management, but I'm going to say you probably should also have a plan for what happens if the next Log4j drops. or I should say log4shell, because log4j is not really dropping, or the next SolarWinds. Like, what happens if we discover that one of our vendors has their supply chain compromised, or if we find that one of our open source library does, we need to plan for that. And it's almost like putting a thing in motion. And then once you have a plan for it, you then need to be like, okay, I should have visibility into this thing, because a plan is useless if I never know whether it's actually going to happen. Right.
Yeah. It's actually pretty funny on that planning tabletop exercise thing. About 2 weeks before the XEutils backdoor kind of thing dropped, CISA ran a tabletop exercise somewhere around, like a public tabletop exercise they did around recovering from a backdoor in open source project. Like the timing was hilarious. But yeah, it's those types of things do help.
I tell you what, cybersecurity has a lot of things that you couldn't dream them up if you tried.
Yeah.
You know, you could come out with the most far-fetched idea in the world, and then all of a sudden you're like, this wasn't supposed to be a reality, everyone.
Yeah.
You know, cough AI. But any event, that being said, so Dan, your inspiration, your history, I think, is one that's contributed to, obviously, like, you know, Chainguard's, you know, rising success. What is a piece of advice that you've learned or you've observed that you would pass down to another founder? Maybe someone who's like sitting on the edge of like, should I do it? Or should I not? What's one thing you'd say to them of like, here's why?
Yeah, I think I talk to people a lot. They talk about starting a company. They have some idea. I think the biggest one is it's got to be an idea you're not going to get sick of for the next 10 years, right? If you start a company, you've got to be in it for 10 years. And if you can't picture yourself still wanting to work on the same thing 10 years from now, then just wait, right? It's less about not starting a company and more not starting it right now, or not starting one with this idea. Because you're losing out on the opportunity cost, really, of what if something better comes along, what if a better co-founder shows up, or what if there's a better product idea or something like that. You're leaving that on the table if you start a company today with something you're not that passionate about. So make sure that you're ready for the 10-year slog, and make sure that that's something you really want to spend the next decade on.
Yeah. Okay, you brought up one thing I want to bring up. How important is it to find the right co-founder?
Incredibly important. Yeah. Yeah. Same with early investors too. If you're going to go the venture route and raise funding, you're stuck with these people for a long time. Yeah.
That is one conversation I always have when someone says they want to start a company, because I've been through a few, and finding the right fit who understand the industry is so important for sure.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Dan, this has been a really cool experience. Admittedly, we get on this show, and Jess and I really want to just kind of understand the journey that it takes to build these companies and to get this up here, and to hear kind of your background and how it's translated into what you do now. Is just, it's been a really, really, really good story. I appreciate you jumping on here to share this with us today.
Awesome. Yeah.
Thank you
so much.
Yeah, it's been great having you. And to our listeners who are out there, I got to tell you, I don't want to say a little bit in a diminishing sense, but I like to learn more about someone as I meet them. Dan made a lot of really good points today about and very succinct to the points about ways to think about securing software supply chain. And if you're somewhere out there who's like, hey, Dan is describing exactly the same issues I'm running into, dig in and do a little bit of research, and Dan, I want to give you an opportunity. Where can folks go learn more about you or learn more about Chainguard? Quick, elevator. I don't want to say an elevator pitch, but more like, what are some resources that folks can use to learn more about you?
Our website, chainguard.dev, that's the best place to go. We have learning docs, an academy, tutorials, and all the product information too.
Awesome. Good stuff. Well, there we go, folks. With that said, it's been another fantastic episode. A huge thanks to all of our listeners and everyone who's been joining on here. Dan, thank you so much for joining us. And last but not least, Jess, it's good to see you again. And I think we'll be talking again soon.
Absolutely. Thanks, everyone.
Awesome.
Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.